I mean, delegating, if it's your first
Yeah.
kind of time needing to delegate, is really uncomfortable for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
getting good at it is a superpower. And with that, you kind of have to also get better at being, if you're a perfectionist, you need to be happy with 80, 85% instead of 100% and take, more movement, more volume getting done and moving forward than perfection on most things. Now there's
Yeah.
some exceptions. Personal data security, probably want to be 100% on that, some things like that. But
Yeah.
other things, most things can have a little more wiggle room than that. And
Yeah.
it's better to move faster and let people, try not to get in their way. I'd say that's my management mantra is let me not prevent others from being successful.
Welkom bij Women Disrupting Tech. Mijn naam is Dirk-Jan Hupkes en in deze podcast ga ik op ontdekkingsreis in de wereld van vrouwen in de technologiesector. Ik ga in gesprek met vrouwen die in tech werken of oprichter zijn van een tech-startup. Ik ga op zoek naar het antwoord op de vraag hoe zij er wel in geslaagd zijn om succes te hebben. Met andere woorden, hoe zij de technologiesector disrupten. Luister je mee? Hey, welcome back to Women Disrupting Tech. Thank you for listening. So, how does experience in the tech startup ecosystem help you build a startup? That's the theme of this episode. Caroline Cadwell is my guest as we discover how she uses her experience as an early employee at Yelp in her new role as CEO and co-founder at Unpluq. Caroline shares what she has learned in 15 years of working for tech startups in two ecosystems, and we discover why conventional salary negotiation advice doesn't necessarily work for women. Plus, you'll learn how Caroline helps people beat their technology addiction with technology. So please welcome to Women Disrupting Tech, Caroline Cadwell. So, welcome, Caroline. Thank you for being my guest today on Women Disrupting Tech. The question I always ask at the beginning is how you got into your current job or into your current position.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks so much for reaching out and including me and giving me this opportunity to share what I've experienced with other women out there. So you want to know how I got into my first role or my current job? My current job, you said.
Current job, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of Unpluq. It's spelled with a Q if you're out looking for it at the end. And I've known for a long time that I wanted to be a founder. In fact, the last several executive jobs that I've taken, all in startups, which has been the duration of my career, 15 years of startups, I've sort of asked myself, well, should I go and start a company instead of taking this role? And it never was really the right time because I didn't have the co-founders that I was looking for, and I didn't have I didn't have clear what problem I wanted to solve, and I thought those were really important prerequisites to be successful at that. And so I ended up in this role after a burnout. And interestingly, the solution, the kind of problem that we're working on, is interrelated with burnout, but it's also related with digital addiction and digital distraction and just this unintended time that we spend on our devices when it's not, intended that we're going to go relax doing it or we're going to go work doing it. It's all kind of intertwined. And so I spent a year doing some consulting and working a lot less hours, and then spent a lot of hours meeting people and talking to them and trying to find the right co-founders. And what I really did is focus on values and communication style. And that led me to the team that I'm working with now, which I've been working with for more than a year as CEO and founder.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, because you are in Barcelona, I think, and most of the team is in Delft, Rotterdam. How does that work? Do you travel in every so often?
Yeah, so we're a fully remote team. And I've built and run fully remote teams before in non-CEO but other executive roles. And it really requires communication skills
Uh-huh.
and proactivity. So a lot of the values that I was looking for in those communication skills are ones that we will have to continue looking for in employees that we bring into the company over time. Right now, the team's small.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and indeed, my co-founder, one of them is in Rotterdam, another is temporarily here in Barcelona as well,
Oh,
for a
okay.
couple of months. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And we're all kind of relatively young, and my co-founder is even more so, and they have the flexibility to be wherever they need to be. We found that working remotely works really well as long as we can have some in-person meetups periodically. And in those meetups, we spend 3, 4, 5 days together and work through bigger picture, more complex problems together.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do meet in person every once in a while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on what we're working on and what kind of problems we're facing, what
Okay.
challenges, right?
Is that a sort of fixed periodicity?
No, I mean, we try to, but we're really early stage, so it's hard
Uh-huh.
to justify budget unless there's really a reason to
Mm-hmm.
go and connect. If we're feeling like things are moving more slowly than they should, or that there's a lot of small topics that we haven't been able to have good, meaningful conversations. Sometimes you just need to have a whiteboard together
Yeah.
and be able to draw it out.
Mm-hmm.
And digitally just doesn't quite work the same way yet. I believe
Okay.
it could
Yeah,
eventually.
at some point it will. I mean, it's already good to hear that you found a way that to make it work, because that's at least that's my experience. That it's quite difficult to make it work online, only online.
I actually find that it's harder to make it work when it is hybrid. When you, especially if you have some full time remote people and some people who are part time or full time in person, that's a lot
Mhm.
harder than having everybody remote.
Oh, how is that?
Well, I think that it's a lot harder to remember to loop in your remote colleagues if you're in person.
Ah, yeah,
And
yeah.
if you're in person, you might not spend as much time on Slack or whatever internal
Mm-hmm.
communication tool you're using. And so I found it a lot harder to keep everybody going in the same direction
Uh-huh.
when it's split and inconsistent than it is to have everybody facing the same communication challenges with remote and everybody knowing how to work around that and work with
Okay.
it.
Cool. I want to go back a bit in time because you've been working in tech pretty much all your life. I think you started as a 15-year-old fixing malware on the computers of your mother's bridge club.
Yeah, that is true.
Uh, but you were also employee number 60, I think, at Yelp, and you saw it grow uh, to even an IPO. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was a wild ride, and I was in my early 20s when I joined Yelp. It was my first sort of full-time real job. I'd worked retail and all sorts of things during university, but
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I got this opportunity in the sales organization there as my first real job, and it was this really exciting moment where Yelp had found product market fit with small businesses,
Mm-hmm.
not with every type of market that they have now, but they had figured it out for one segment
Mm-hmm.
and they were scaling.
Yeah.
And so I joined them as one of the first of many sales classes of 20, 30 people at a time that they did every other month for several years
Uh-huh.
following that. So employee number 60 ended up, doing sales there and being one of their top salespeople. I was in the top 3 for most of the time that I was there, which was 4 years.
Uh-huh.
And incredibly, the people that I worked with at that time continue to be in my network and continue to be important to it. And the leadership at Yelp at that time, Jed Nachman was VP of Sales. He's now COO of Yelp, which is now a publicly traded company.
Mm-hmm.
Had always told us that we should look at the people next to us because we will know them our whole lives, and he was absolutely right. I learned a lot of really important things there that have to do with, I think, kind of quintessential Silicon Valley style startup culture. Most of it was actually pretty good. I certainly had complaints at the time I was there.
Uh-huh.
I saw a lot of things that went wrong and could have been better. But then when I went and worked at other startups later in my career, I was like, wow, they are really the poster child of how to grow a company. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I went to the Harvard of startups. It was
Uh-huh.
really well done how they grew. Um, So I was lucky because they also had a number of women involved in middle management at that time who later grew to more senior positions, which is pretty unusual, especially
Yeah.
when we're talking about, this is 2008.
Uh-huh.
So quite some years back. And there was some awareness in that region about inequality of women in leadership, but there weren't many initiatives to fix it, and there wasn't really any clear ideas about the compound reasons that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
So a number of different things that I learned there, and that it made it interesting to work there, and I'm very grateful that's where I started my career, because I learned a lot of things that I've pulled from and used again later in my career. So if you are someone who is early in your career, don't underestimate the impact of that first role, and try
Yeah.
to find the right company for you. And ideally, if you're interested in startups, find one that's at a scaling phase that is able to grow quickly, and you get that experience of seeing what is it like to really build a company. Even if they
Mm-hmm.
do it badly, you learn a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, true. On the building side, you told me that you had women in middle management, which I think still for many startups is sort of, well, not necessarily normal. Was that? Do you know if that was uh, if they did it on purpose, or was that just how things happened?
I wasn't privy to the conversations at that time that were happening at the highest management levels, despite that, I'd share an elevator with Jeremy Stoppelman, and indeed he knows who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wasn't privy to those conversations, so I don't know if they made a conscious effort about it, but I think that they were mindful of the inequality existing
Mm-hmm.
in startups and in general. It certainly is a topic that goes beyond startups, but we do see it in tech, and I think it also is harder sometimes to address that issue if your company is particularly deep tech. I'm not sure that's fair, and I'm not sure it's true that women wouldn't be interested in working there, but it seems like the more technical the product, the less women are involved in it. And
Mm-hmm.
it also is something about who's the end user of the product, right? So gaming,
Yeah.
for example, my brother's in gaming,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not talking about gambling. I'm talking about, video games and
Yeah.
strategy games, computer games. Um, it's mostly men who consume those products. And so you can imagine it might be hard to hire people to work passionately on that product, to have a higher proportion of women than are actually using the end product. Luckily, Yelp has a lot of female users, and it's pretty well
Mm-hmm.
split between men and women. And I found that overall in the company, there was a pretty even amount of men and women, and they had clear salary ranges for everything. So there was not as much discriminatory, um, you know, there wasn't as much room for inequality in pay
Mm-hmm.
ranges.
Yeah, the
Um,
system was built in a way that it sort of made it, well, difficult
yeah.
to discriminate in favor or against people.
Right, and that isn't to say that no discrimination happened, but
Mm.
I would say of the organizations I've been in, I saw less of it.
Okay. So I think you worked in at least two ecosystems. One is the Valley one, and the other one is the European ecosystem. Any differences between the two that jump out at you?
Yeah, and I don't think, your the audience here, those of you listening will find this surprising. But to clarify, I'm American. I grew up partially overseas, so my value system internally is a little split between different cultures. It's not totally American inside.
Hmm.
I worked in Silicon Valley at the beginning of my career for about 10 years. And then I moved to Barcelona, where I've been for about 10 years. And also, with that transition, very quickly after I came to Barcelona, I started being in leadership. I actually
Hmm.
haven't been in leadership in the US, which is pretty different. Um, and the main difference I've seen is that we're a little bit behind. Now, I'm in Southern Europe. I only recently started working with my colleagues in the Netherlands, and I
Hmm.
do think there's some differences in advancement on this topic. But I think that being in Spain, I see a lot more startups where they're trying to replicate something that's already working in Silicon Valley and do it for the Spanish market, which is not usually one of the first or even second markets that those companies go for, but they eventually
Mm.
will need to acquire a company that has that market.
Uh-huh.
And along with that difference, the other difference I see is in, women in leadership, and there's simply a lot less of it in, at least in Southern Europe.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've had a number of leadership positions in Spain with startups, and I have always been the only woman in leadership, and often the only woman even from middle management up.
How was that for you?
Hard. It's hard. It's exciting in that somebody needs to go in there and start participating and
Mm-hmm.
find a way to get in
Yeah.
and start that change, but it's hard. Um, there are things that your colleagues just won't realize they're doing that are um, either alienating or putting off or non-inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And then compounding that, you might have language differences as well, right? So in Barcelona, for example, we have um, both Spanish and Catalan. And then I'm often working in a company whose official language might be English for working.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, if the rest of the management team is Catalan, they switch into Catalan. And I speak Spanish fluently, but my Catalan is limited.
Yeah.
So there's a number of compounding issues. But certainly being the only woman in the org can be difficult. I had one, some organizations were great. Others, constantly reminded me and also any female colleagues I had that were, at lower, in this case, lower levels of the organization, constantly that they were women.
Mm-hmm. In what way?
And well, they'd even say, "Oh, I really like working with women. They're easier to work with." And I'm like, "Well, that's a strange blanket statement, and it tells a little bit about your worldview."
Mm-hmm.
it's, I mean, it's even if it sounds complimentary, there's fundamentally something behind that that tells you that they're seeing, your performance under the guise of, do I think just because of your gender you may be easier or harder to work with? And that also compounds this idea that if you communicate with them differently than they expect a woman to communicate with them, perhaps you get a different reaction
Mm-hmm.
than expected.
I've been guilty of using that same statement because I had female managers like half of my professional life. I try not to distinguish between having women around me or men around me. But what makes it what gives it a negative connotation?
So for me, and perhaps, I can speak for myself, but I think some other women certainly feel this way. Um, it makes part of your performance or way of working with each other
Hmm?
not owned by you, the person, but by gender stereotypes. That women are
Oh.
better at communication or are easier, more complacent, or that they are more likely to compromise, or any of these other sort of stereotypes around what women are expected to
Mm-hmm.
act like. I mean, there's a lot of talk around, if women are approached, let's put this in a different frame, just as an example,
Yeah.
briefly. If women are approached by a man on the street, and the guy is asking, hey, let's go for a coffee, or tries to talk to them, or is trying to make some kind of romantic advance, um, women often will be like, oh, thanks, but I'm in a relationship. They might not be. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They try to not hurt the man in rejecting him because
Mm-hmm.
it's dangerous. Because there's a inherent constant feeling of, if I piss this guy off, am I going to be physically in danger?
Uh-huh.
um,
Okay.
and so there's this learning from a very early age in our cultures, in Western culture at least,
Mm-hmm.
where you learn to placiate men.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that kind of comes out for me when someone says, And it's not that it stops me in my tracks or prevents me from continuing with my work, but it's something I
Mm.
notice
Yeah.
that it then kind of seems like, okay, well, there's some gender stereotypes here about like what is a woman like, and I think that it's not helpful to think that women as a group are fundamentally one way or another. And it takes away the power from the individual of their great work that they're doing and how they interact with their colleagues or with you.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. I definitely buy into that. To that. Yeah.
But I do recognize also that it was not malintention when someone says this. That it may not be
Yeah.
intent. They're not trying to.
No, no,
That
no. But
yeah,
usually the road to hell is paved with good intentions, they say. And
it's a good
usually
idiom.
men says, and I've been guilty of this myself, again, say things that they don't intend to as a bad way, but can come across totally different. Uh, Out of curiosity, do you actually tell people that? Because you're discussing it now on a podcast, but do you actually tell people this when in a professional
Yeah,
environment?
it's a great question. I think it depends on the degree of trust that I have with him. If my co-founder said this, I would tell him.
Yeah.
Okay. If my boss in a prior job that I had been in for 3 months said this, I probably wouldn't. If my boss of 6 or 12 months who I had tension with or
Mm.
who wasn't, maybe I could see some other problems, said it, I would probably skip it because it's going to hurt me
Mhm.
if I bring it up. It might help the greater good of
Mhm.
working towards equality, but it's not going to be great for my personal outcome. And in fact, there's some really interesting studies on that.
Oh.
I listened to a great episode of Hidden Brain. I'll have to find the link for you after our
Mhm.
chat here.
Yeah.
But great episode of Hidden Brain that talked about, I think it's called "Is It Better to Know?" And it goes through a couple different examples of women who are minorities, so
Mhm.
women of color specifically, and how when you are aware of bias, when you're aware of inequality,
Mhm.
your personal outcomes in life, your happiness, your financial outcome will
Mhm.
be worse. But if you are aware of these things,
Uh,
the progress in your society and your group
mhm.
will be more over time. But it's kind of like you're paying it forward to the next generation
Yeah.
because your personal outcomes will be worse. You will face backlash.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
sacrifice
Yeah.
yourself in a sense.
Indeed. At
Okay.
least statistically, it's
Yeah.
true. There's always exceptions, but overall,
Yeah.
that is true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like a really interesting episode to include in the show notes.
Yeah.
You another thing you told me before, and maybe there's research on this, maybe there's not, but that women's salaries in tech tend to top off when they turn 40. And any views on why that would be?
This is the bad news podcast episode.
Yeah.
um, it's something I know there was a study on it. I tried to find it. I couldn't find it. Maybe one of your
Hmm.
listeners will find it. But it was,
Okay.
I'd say 8 to 10 years ago that I heard this or read it. I think I might
Hmm.
have read it in either Harvard Business Review or it was a credible publication that had this
Hmm.
out. I know that much. Um, and it basically said, hey, if you're a woman and you're in tech, statistically at that time 10 years
Hmm.
ago, which in tech is a long time ago also,
Yeah.
so let's note that, but your salary is unlikely to increase more than the rate of inflation after the age of 40. So whatever salary gains you want to get, whatever salary you want to be at when you start looking towards retirement, and your peak in salary
Hmm.
will be around 40. And I turned 40 this year, so it's been on my
Oh.
mind.
Yeah, I can imagine because then. But what do you do to make sure that it doesn't top off?
I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. For myself, the way I thought about it was,
Hmm?
gee, I need to climb as far and as fast as I can in my 30s. But honestly, how far and fast you can go in your 30s depends on where you started your career. And if you started your career like most women at a lower salary than your male counterparts,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to earn at least $1 million less over your lifetime. And in fact, there's also really great resources on how to calculate that wage difference and what it means for your financial future and your financial
Mm-hmm.
independence and your retirement, from a woman named Catherine Valentine. It's Catherine with a Y in it,
Mm-hmm.
who has a company called Worthmore Strategies. She comes in and does keynotes and coaching and workshops in large companies on
Uh-huh.
how women can negotiate specifically for themselves, which is very different than negotiating for a group or for a
Uh-huh.
company. And she's done a lot of research and gathered a lot of research on um, around how to navigate these facts of like, gee, you're going to stop earning more, you're going to stop getting raises after 40. And I suspect it does have something to do with the workload of women in the household and childbearing age and these kind of things, and hopefully with
Mm-hmm.
men stepping up a bit more on those duties, in some countries and cultures more than others, in some socioeconomic groups more than others. Hopefully that can start changing some of those realities that we're having to negotiate around right now.
Okay. Um, any specific tips that you have on, because I think you also do workshops on salary negotiations yourself?
I've done a couple, yeah. Just sharing what I've learned and experienced with my local community here in Barcelona, and especially for women who are changing functional areas. So maybe moving from support or operations and they want to go into some other department, maybe more
Mm-hmm.
technical,
Yeah.
um, making that transition and how to leverage their existing experience when they're going into something that seems unrelated, right? And how to then know what kind of salary to ask for, even though they feel like they're beginning again. And in terms of negotiating while female,
Uh-huh.
um, when you're doing it for yourself, one thing I learned from Catherine Valentine, in fact, and also
Mm-hmm.
from other sources and studies and my own experience, is that you will get a better outcome if you use a more collaborative negotiation technique,
Mm-hmm.
where you lay out how does your presence benefit the company? What are the company's goals, and can we work together to find a way to make sure that you can be enabled to do your work to contribute to that common goal?
Mm-hmm.
And that framing things in a collaborative way is very important to not facing backlash when you're asking for, say, more money.
Yeah.
And that and I think the biggest thing that I'd love to share with your audience, and that I wish I had known 15, 20 years ago,
Uh-huh.
is that if you take if you read books on negotiation, if you read articles on negotiation, even ones that are, say, in the Wall Street Journal or Harvard Business Review,
Uh-huh.
the research is primarily based on men.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen in more recent studies about salary negotiation is that even though women are now negotiating more often, because
Mm-hmm.
it used to be that the salary gap was explained away by, well, women don't ask for more money and they should be
Yeah.
negotiating.
Yeah.
Women now negotiate more often than men do in salary
Mm-hmm.
negotiations,
Yeah.
and yet they don't get what they want as often as men do. They're still not closing the salary gap with just
No.
that. And um, the part of it that's in our control, even though it sucks basically that we have to
Mm.
change who we are and how we negotiate at a personal level. But some of this can be mitigated by changing your negotiation style to one that both men and women will be more receptive of coming from a woman.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the big disclaimer I really wanted to share is that not all negotiation advice is equal. And some of it is very dangerous for women to use because
Yeah.
they will face backlash if they negotiate the same way as a man might.
Yeah. Uh, would say that if they do hardball negotiations, that's something that especially if there's a man sitting across of the table, uh, it's not working in a woman's favor.
I think a very logical, if you do a very logical negotiation, like if we're talking about a salary
Huh?
increase and you say, hey, my goals were X, Y, and Z. I
Mm,
accomplished X, Y, and Z,
mm,
and I exceeded it, by this amount.
mm,
Um, and you've said that my work in this last review, you said my work was like this and it's good. Um, and I've taken on these additional responsibilities, and you've asked me to also moving forward, take on these other responsibilities. And I've done the market research, and this is what this kind of role looks like. And here's what the salary range should be. And this is the
Mm.
salary I would like.
Mm.
It will not go well. But
No.
if you frame it as, gee, the company has these goals and we've all worked together to get to this place. And here's what I've specifically done. And I'm really excited about getting to the next goal that we have for this year. And
Mm.
gee, I'd love to make this happen. How do you think we could work together to get me into a role that matches the description of what I'm actually doing today? And
Mm.
gee, what do you think the common salary for that is? It looks like, from what I've seen and the colleagues here in our company, that it's around this range. How can we get there?
Mhm.
I'm not an expert at this either, so please don't, use my words verbatim, and those of you listening, but
Yeah.
just be aware that changing that style of presenting the same facts
Uh-huh.
um, can result in a very different outcome.
And knowing the facts also. So
I,
knowing what the
yeah,
salary range is, I think
I
still.
think it's good. It's good to be armed with knowledge, but I think the harder thing is deciding when to use it and when to mention it and when not to.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like a sales process, right? Like, you don't need to tell the customer everything all at once. You need to give them the information they need to get to the next step.
On that point, I want to move on
Sure.
to Unplug, because you're actually solving technology addiction with technology, and I was wondering, okay, how does that work?
Yeah. Tech to solve your tech problems.
Yeah.
So I think most people, if they don't have the problem themselves, someone close to them does, which is this sort of unintentional scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts with the mobile phone, but that's not exclusively what Unplug is dealing with. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so certainly time that we spend on our phone scrolling Instagram or Reddit or TikTok or even playing games
Mm-hmm.
um, is time that we're usually not creating wonderful memories and uplifting dopamine, real lasting dopamine, creating interactions with people,
No.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that with the rise of smartphones over the
Mm-hmm.
last 10, 15 years, we've also seen a rise of loneliness, an
Mm-hmm.
epidemic of loneliness. We're
Yeah.
more connected than ever, and we feel less connected. And so, what we're starting to see is that some people have made that connection
Mm-hmm.
and they want to change it. And we have a tool
Mm-hmm.
that helps them make really lasting behavior change, and it makes it easy. So, people who use our physical keychain to act as a key
Mm-hmm.
to their distracting apps, the ones that if they didn't spend 2 hours on in the day, they probably wouldn't regret it.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't miss it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those are the ones we can help them with. And the people who use that are saving about 35 days a year of screen time. It's more than a month on
Uh-huh.
average
Uh-huh.
of waking hours that they are not on their phone anymore and that they freed up to do the things they love. A lot of people tell us they're reading more, they're seeing their
Mm-hmm.
friends and family more,
Yeah.
they're spending quality time with their partner, things
Yeah.
that actually enrich your memories and your life.
Okay. So I have an iPhone, and there's something on their feature called Screen Time, which
Yep.
I use quite religiously, I have to say, because I've set
Great.
the games to 30 minutes and the socials, I think, also to an hour or so per day. And I only override that if I need to post something and forgot it. Actually used my computer a lot to post. How is Unplug different from features like screen time?
Yeah, great question. And that's great that you're using it and it's working for you. We do find it works for some people, but for a lot of people, they don't have the level of willpower. And frankly, I don't think willpower is really a great tool when there's
Yeah.
been, trillions of dollars poured into keeping your attention. It's kind of an unfair fight
Yeah.
to expect your willpower to be enough on this when it's been so engineered to hack at your own chemistry to make you
Mm-hmm.
want to keep looking at it. But you're doing a great job of keeping to your own rules.
Mm-hmm.
And most people find that very hard is what we've learned from our customers is
Mm-hmm.
that many people try that and they continue hitting give me 15 more minutes or
Yeah.
they remove the settings altogether. Um, and it doesn't provoke the kind of behavior change that they're hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of the how is it different, we with the Unpluq tag, which is this physical kind of key, it's a wireless NFC based little key fob.
Mm-hmm.
You have to physically get up and get it in order to get in and open that app to post when you forgot to post for work.
Yeah.
So you don't unintentionally end up in it. And not only that, but once you unblock it, it gives you however many minutes you've set ahead. Not right there in that moment, but that you set ahead to do. So normally it's 5 minutes, for example,
Yeah.
and you get in and you get out because even if you post and then you're suddenly scrolling your feed, it cuts you off after 5 minutes.
Yeah. So you never lose more than 4 minutes,
However
I
many
guess.
you've set.
Yeah.
It could be 2, 3, 10, 30, but
Yeah.
you set it and it sounds like, what you're experiencing by having those time limits is friction, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's making it
Yeah.
harder for you to go back in.
Yeah.
And Unplug has a different level of friction, which is if you're sitting on the sofa and you are watching something with your family or even on your own and a commercial comes on or there's an uncomfortable scene,
Mm-hmm.
what do? You reach for your phone
Yeah.
and you start looking at that and it makes that not possible unless you want to get up off the sofa and go towards the door or wherever you keep your keys and get them and be very intentional about unblocking it. So you
Yeah.
maintain control, but it makes it harder.
Okay. So by actually does its work by adding friction to the process in the form of, well, quite literally a key that you have to use to
Yeah.
unlock the screen,
Specific apps, not every
rather than
app, but
just swiping. Oh yeah, give me 15 more minutes.
yeah. If it's interesting because there are other, there's screen time settings, which is actually we use screen time settings to deliver our service. It's
Mm-hmm.
part of how we're able to do it on iPhone.
Uh-huh.
But we do it a little bit differently. And then we have that physical interaction, which is really key. And what we've also found is that people who do that physical interaction are still doing it a year later. More than half of them stick with it and really make a meaningful change in their behavior. So that's something that the feedback has been on other apps that just provide a digital only solution where they can tap it away, they can delete the app, they can
Mm-hmm.
or you might be somebody who has deleted Instagram over and over again and reinstalled it. This
Uh-huh.
prevents you from having to be like, oh, what's my login again? And oh, I can't message my friend and tell them I'm late meeting them for lunch. And it prevents that and it allows you to have a more modulated way of managing that.
Okay. Sounds really cool. What's, out of curiosity, what stage are you in? Are this is already on the market, right?
Yeah. So it's already on the market. We're in both of the app stores. So the Apple App Store as well as Google Play. You can also buy the physical tag on our website, which is
Mm-hmm.
unplug.com. And we're in the market. There are more than 100,000 people who have Unplug. And it's available in most of the world as well. Most of our customers are in the US, but
Mm-hmm.
it's available everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I was wondering, because you've been into ecosystems, you've been in tech all your life, mainly in the startup scene. Are there any lessons you've learned during your career that you actually apply now as a founder and CEO?
Yeah. So some of these go back to Yelp and some are more recent. There's two or three I'll rattle out. One of them is to be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we did at Yelp, and with that also to be comfortable with change.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually even symbolized that in the early days, in the early parts of my career, by changing desks about every 6 weeks. We were in little pods of 3 to 4 people of desks
Mm-hmm.
kind of huddled together all over this big open environment. And we would go and change who we're sitting with and who we're next to over and over again every few weeks,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of represent that constant change. And I think that's because in early stage companies, you have to change course and correct constantly, and you have to be
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with making big decisions and big changes quickly.
Yeah.
And that's something that has definitely carried on into, my life as an executive and later now as a CEO. Um, Another one is, since I've been in leadership in the last few years, I've had the pleasure of working, with some boards and with some advisors to companies, and one of them, you know, is a really humble person and values a lot humility, and it's something I aspire to have more of for sure. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
healthy to constantly want to improve yourself in that way. And he asked me to reflect on who were all the people throughout my career and life
Mm-hmm.
that really impacted the course of my life, that impacted the directions that I took, the
Uh-huh.
decisions I made, and really reflect on that, which inevitably resulted in me feeling a lot of gratitude to others who have um, helped me along the way, and some who maybe had harmed me but ended up pushing me into a better direction, or into the direction that is my reality, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy with, right? So,
Yeah.
um so I think that was a really interesting thing, is to, you know, practice being grateful, not as a like daily meditation practice. So that's fine if you do that. That's
Mm-hmm.
great. I admire you for doing so. It's not for me. At least not today. I think that it is really valuable to reflect on and make sure you thank and tell the people how they impacted your life, and maintaining those relationships and connections. You do it because you really are grateful and you really did notice how it impacted your trajectory as a person.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd be surprised how those things bring value and satisfaction to the other person, and allow them to continue helping others and be motivated to do so, and also how those connections might come back to you professionally later on as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised. Yeah.
Sounds like great advice. Any things that you would do differently, or that you plan to do differently in terms of hiring, promoting people, uh, etc.
Yeah.
within your company?
um I would like, and it might be hard to stick with this to move quickly enough, but I would really like to make sure that we have enough women candidates when we have roles open that we've
Mm-hmm.
considered. um I Obviously, especially in a small company where there's very few people and every person really has a big impact on the bottom line,
Mm-hmm.
I want to pick the best candidate I can find for every role. Um, which will be based on, different kind of criteria depending on each role, but I would like to make sure we have enough people at the top of the funnel, that we're making
Yeah.
an effort to get in front of women.
Mm-hmm.
um, and also that we're writing our job descriptions in a way that women will apply, because the reality is that most women won't apply, and I'm sure you've all heard this before, unless they meet almost 10 out of 10 criteria,
Yeah.
right, instead of men
Yeah.
who will apply when
That's
they have 4 or 6.
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
right, so I think, having a simple disclaimer at the top of the description, because women do tend, I think, also to read more thoroughly some of the descriptions.
Oh yeah.
Um, Having a disclaimer that says, "Hey, if you don't meet all the criteria, but you feel passionately that you would be a good fit for this role, we encourage you to apply."
Yeah.
This kind of thing can go a long way in getting more
Mm-hmm.
candidates. Yeah. So I think hiring is probably one of the most powerful and useful things that you can be good at or try to get better at as a founder or as a leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
It can
sure.
be, it
Because
can,
building a team is like a really big part of building a company. I mean, you can build a product, But if you have a good team, you can actually grow a lot faster over time.
I mean, delegating, if it's your first
Yeah.
kind of time needing to delegate, is really uncomfortable for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
getting good at it is a superpower. And with that, you kind of have to also get better at being, if you're a perfectionist, you need to be happy with 80, 85% instead of 100%, and take, more movement, more volume getting done and moving forward than perfection on most things. Now there's
Yeah.
some exceptions. Personal data security, probably want to be 100% on that, some things like that, but
Yeah.
other things, most things can have a little more wiggle room than that. And
Yeah.
it's better to move faster and let people, try not to get in their way. I'd say that's my management mantra is, let me not prevent others from being successful.
Well, that sounds like a great mantra. I want to move towards closing the conversation a bit. There's two questions I have left. One is that I have an arrangement with Jacqueline van der Ende. She's a previous guest, co-founder of Carbon Equity, and she challenged me to make this podcast irrelevant in 9 years from now. Um, what would be your advice to make this happen?
Whew, it's a big question. I'd say my advice today, which I hope
Hmm.
will need changes to next year, right, as we knock out some of these things, would be to educate yourself about what negotiation tactics will help you today
Hmm.
in terms of your personal salary and compensation negotiations.
Hmm.
Keeping in mind that common advice might not be the right advice for you as a woman.
Hmm.
Um, I would say hold your, male, the men that you're close enough to in your life. It could be a colleague, it could be a partner or a parent or a child, accountable for
Hmm.
recognizing inequality when it happens, or recognizing unequal treatment, so that
Okay,
they
so
have an
that
opportunity to change.
accountability in this case, what does that look like?
So if you have a co-founder who
Hmm.
says, "Gee, I really like working with women,"
Uh huh.
challenge them to say, "What do you really mean by that?" And could you feel that you've expressed the same sentiment by saying, "I really like how you communicate," or "I really like how you organize your work,"
Hmm.
or some other thing. And I think just be mindful of trying to ask yourself sometimes if you would say the same thing to a man. I think that's a good litmus.
Hmm.
And for the men out there, that's the thing I would ask them to do is say, when you are interacting with female colleagues of any type, and also women that you're negotiating with, or that you are um, interacting with in a professional world, to just reflect on, would I say the same thing to a guy?
That
Yeah.
sounds like a perfect place to close. Thank you very much for the conversation, Caroline. Really appreciated it. All your wisdom. Last question: where can listeners find more information about you and about Unpluq, and where can they connect with you?
Yeah, I do check in on my LinkedIn regularly. So it's Caroline Cadwell. If you sort by Spain, you'll find me.
Hmm.
And certainly, if you find me on socials, feel free to connect. Unplug is easy to find on the web as well. It's unpluq.com. And we do read every single support email that we get. So if you have any problem or challenge in using that, or have feedback, I'd love to hear from you.
Good. Well, we'll include those links in the show notes, and also include the link to the podcast you mentioned. Thank you very much, Caroline, and listeners. Thank you very much for listening, and hope to see you the next time. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Caroline and I hope that you've enjoyed our conversation as much as we did. A big thank you to Jorn Richter, who connected us. You can learn more about Unpluq, their app, and the podcast and articles that we mentioned, and you can connect with Caroline via the links in the show notes. As usual, you can find the show notes at womendisruptingtech.blog. There you can also find the entire archive of all episodes that I published so far, as well as detailed bios of my guests. For a weekly dose of Women Disrupting Tech inspiration, you can also follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple, and Goodpods. If you do, please don't forget to give the show a rating or a review, because that way you will help other people discover the podcast. If you want to help my guest to make this podcast obsolete in 9 years from now, there's a very easy way to do this. Please share the podcast with friends, family, and coworkers, because this way you give my guest a platform they need to make it happen. Finally, if you want to connect with me, you can reach me via dirkjan@womendisruptingtech.blog or on LinkedIn. Just look up my name and you'll find me. With that, I wish you a wonderful day and I hope to see you in the next episode.